Alrighty then, we are live. Thank you everybody who came to join us. Welcome to yet another episode of Brony Debates. I'm your host, Brony Buck, as always. Joining me today is one of my oldest friends in the Brony fandom, Scan120. How are you doing, Scan?
Doing good.
Good. And next to him on the left in the icon there, we've got one of my biggest supporters and friend of the show as well, DJSkywalker. How are you doing, DJ?
We are live.
Hello.
All right. And right there is another one of my oldest friends in the fandom, former fellow analyst, Deverer. How are you doing?
I am doing just fine. Just fine.
Nice. Now today, we're going to be tackling a topic that I've been looking forward to a chance to tackle. And then Concert Cruizer suggested that we do this one today, and unfortunately he couldn't make it for this one, which really is, I guess, disappointing in a way, because he had some pretty good opinions on this, and I've encouraged him to make his own videos on it as well. But the four of us will have to do. We're going to be talking about Death of the Author. So for those who don't know out in the audience, Death of the Author is a commonly referred to topic in the debate of how to analyze a story, I guess would be the right, and in some terms, just general pieces of art. It could be applied to anything. It could be applied to stories, literature, plays, poems, movies, music, paintings. The list could go on. And it basically comes down to whether or not it is viable to analyze the author's intentions and take those into consideration when analyzing their artwork to see if what they had intended, their message, came across. Some people believe that no, whatever the author intended is not applicable once it's in the hands of the audience. Other people say that it is very important to take that into consideration, and then of course there's a good number of people that lie somewhere in the middle. And that's what we're going to be talking about today and trying to get to the bottom of. So I will be moderating the chat today. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, leave it right there in the chat. I will copy and paste it. And once we get to the audience interaction aspect, or a segment of the show, which should be in the back half hour or 15 minutes, depending on how the conversation goes, I'll read off all your questions then. If you would like to be on one of these streams or suggest a topic for a future episode of Brony Debates, I would love to have you on. To suggest a topic, all you have to do is send me a message either on Twitter, Tumblr, or email. All of my contact information is in the description. And if you would like to be on one of these live streams, again, I'd love to have you. We just need you to join my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Big thanks to all of my generous supporters on Patreon, especially those on the $10 and up tier. These guys are Autoknight, Sodden, Girder, Senko, Jennan, Kellogg, Kyle Christensen, Mike's Geek World, the Equestrian City Heroverse series, and right here joining us on stream today, DJSkywalker. And with that, let's get right into it. 3 minutes of rambling later. So let's just start from left to right here. Scan, what do you think about Death of the Author?
I think it's just a natural thing that happens. You can put out a thing with a message, but if you didn't deliver it correctly, it's going to be interpreted in the way that it most shows itself to be.
So are you saying whether or not it's an applicable concept is dependent on the artist's execution of the concept?
I'm saying that if they do not execute it right, then other interpretation can overtake it. But if they put out their interpretation in a way that is pretty undeniable or something, and then people take another meaning from it, then that's just people being arbitrary.
All right, that's interesting. DJ, what do you think?
Let's see. How do I put it into words? I guess I'm more in the no camp on it. I don't really. I don't think that the influence of the writer should be ignored. I don't always agree that it should be factored in when regarding it, especially in like a historical context, since I mean you can look back on a lot of people then and in a modern eye it doesn't really fit with these current views. So I think it shouldn't be forgotten, but doesn't necessarily need to apply when like in a review or something.
All right, that's interesting. And Dev, what do you think?
I am a firm believer in the concept. It can be taken too far. Like, you definitely can have people interpret the wrong way, whether it's out of pure ignorance or even maliciousness. But I just think that Death of the Author, in a way, is valuable for criticism, just for, like, broadening the views that one can have and the interpretation you can get out of it, not just for the public, but just also for the author themselves to learn for how they could execute their craft better, or even just insight into their own craft.
Yep, that's interesting. I definitely don't like Death of the Author as a concept, and it's a tool I very rarely use. I think the only time that I would use Death of the Author in an analysis is when the author themselves explicitly leaves things open to interpretation. Pardon the frog in my throat. But even then, that's taking the author's original intention into consideration during my own analysis. I think the purpose of art is to express some kind of message, and whatever that message may be needs to be heard in its original form and understood by the audience in order to determine whether or not it's applicable to real life or a valid interpretation of whoever is putting their perspective forward. That's how we analyze the objective parts of an artistic medium, which tends to be more subjective in nature. So for that reason, I avoid using it. But at the same time, I understand that once you put out a piece of work into the public eye, that I have no control over how people interpret it, and whether or not they understood what I was trying to tell them, then that is dependent entirely on my execution and technique. So, who of us liked it? I think it was Dev and Scan. So Scan, can you give me an example of when Death of the Author has been used to positively influence a piece of art after it has already come out?
Well, if I'm understanding what you're asking correctly, my example would go to actually the Star Trek series. The creator of the series was actually into the whole concept of communism. So he kind of framed the future as that. But it doesn't quite come off as communism because they have certain things that we don't have that makes it work. But then another enemy was introduced into that world called the Borg. And the Borg have a lot of parallels with all the instances of communism tried to be implemented in our world. So it kind of, Star Trek ended up really, really heavily looking like it was saying communism's really bad, which really pissed off the creator of Star Trek. But I don't think he portrayed in his own series strong enough his positive point of view to, be the dominant of what the medium is telling the audience.
That's interesting. Does anybody have anything to say to that in either support or rebuttal?
Sort of
I
confused.
don't think.
Sort of confused about the original question. Like, I know you said after a work has come out, but couldn't this also apply to like the author themselves or just the creators in general too? Like, once a work is out, it's out. Like, what about future iterations and the like?
Okay, so let's put it in terms of a situation here. A piece comes out, a piece of art comes out. It doesn't matter what kind of art. It doesn't matter who made it. But the intention of it wasn't very clear, or didn't to the audience at large. So the audience at large starts putting forth their own interpretations of the piece, and in the result, one kind of surfaces to the top, and then becomes canon in the eyes of the general public. The question was, when has something like that happened? And the result was the interpretation being better than the original. Or when has something been made better because of audience interpretation?
Understand.
Yeah. Do we have any examples offhand of that?
I'm not sure this would fully apply, but the example I had in mind would be the video game series Five Nights at Freddy's.
Okay, so tell me about Five Nights at Freddy's. I don't know anything about Star Trek or Five Nights at Freddy's, so I'm looking forward to being educated here.
Alright, so the creator of Five Nights at Freddy's, Scott Cawthon, actually had no intentions of making a horror franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
He originally came out with this game. I can't remember the exact name of it, but the context was happy animals, woodchucks, working on this kind of farm mill of sorts, lumber mill, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he came out with a demo of it, and it was panned heavily for being too, like, bare bone. I can't remember the exact criticisms, but one criticism in particular that stuck out was his character models looked absolutely creepy, and the game intended to be all cutesy and kid-friendly, right? So he embraced that idea and took his creepy character models and applied that to a horror setting in the animatronics that we have, and thus set off the franchise as a whole going forward.
Okay, so does that really count as death of the author? That sounds more like he was given advice to do something differently with his work, and he heeded the advice before it even came out.
I wouldn't think it's actually advice, because like in the way I believe it went about, it was like more attacking the game for its faults and just pointing out you're really being, this is supposed to be cute, but you've made them look like horror stories, like a horror story. And I just think in general too, like interpretations like that go against the intent of the author, pointing out an unintended result, will lead to just more results, and it's death of the author in action. The author intended one thing, but a different result or observation came out of it, whether it was the author's intention or not.
Interesting. So, Dev, do you have any examples offhand of this kind of thing?
I just gave you one.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. I meant to say DJ.
No clear examples actually come to mind, and I guess a lot of it applies to like fan works, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. How so?
Well, going to the recent Pony finale for one thing, I've been seeing a lot of comments coming out like, for those that didn't care much for the finale, I've seen some like, oh, it's not my canon, I don't care for how they ended, they didn't leave much to fan interpretation. And it's like, it kind of feels like they're trying to kill the author there.
Okay, so what you're saying is, let me see if I even understood this correctly.
Trying to ignore what was written to create their own, I guess, is what I'm reading.
Yeah, so you're seeing people take it, reject the canon because they don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And is that
the same for Star Wars?
indeed. But the original question is that type of behavior right there. Is it doing anything to help the actual canon of the story? Is it doing anything to make it better? What are we adding? What is the fan base doing to add to the subject material now that the show is over?
Most they're doing is just adding content, I suppose, but I think it's just not a very good mindset to have that you can make it better, I suppose. How to word this? I'm having trouble with my words at the moment. I think it's really arrogant to try to say you know better than the author.
In terms of what? In terms of what they had intended to get across for a message, or how to tell a story?
I think it kind of applies to both, a little more on the former rather than the latter.
Okay, how so?
Well, it comes off a lot to me as this is what they intended to me, and that's all that it means. That came out really weird.
So, a big problem, in my opinion, with the concept of death of the author is that it takes away the author's message of what they were trying to get across here. And I think in order to understand whether or not something is a message of a piece of art is applicable, is to know exactly what the author had intended it to say, because at that point we can judge the author as well as the art piece on its own merits. Whether or not the execution was accurate and did a good job of conveying the message, or whether or not the message is actually applicable to life. So what do you guys think about that? Yes, Scan?
So what if the author, not the main message of the story, but had a sub-message that he put in there, and he didn't express it well enough that people either didn't see it at all or interpreted it a different way? And it's actually a good thing, because the message he was putting out there was a really, really bad idea.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the question that I was asking before, and what kind of examples could we pull from that? But would be
Ender's Game.
Ender's Game. Okay, so I don't know anything about Ender's Game either. Wow, you guys are just catching me on how uncultured I am tonight. Good job. Tell me about Ender's Game.
Ender's Game is a sci-fi novel, one of the best out there, about a future in which we're in a war with another race, and we're training kids to be taking pretty much super autist kids to defend the Earth or something.
Mm-hmm.
So what was later discovered about the author is he's a major misogynist. Not just, people throwing around today, everybody's a misogynist. I mean, he literally has said he thinks women are inferior to men.
Okay.
And he actually has some stuff in the book that kind of points to that, with the boys and the girls in the classes. But it is not so pronounced that you come out of the book thinking, yeah, women are worse than men. So he failed in the message there, but he had put it in the book.
Oh, okay. So that sounds more like a subplot to me. What was the overall intention of Ender's Game?
Yeah, but that's what I was asking, because could death of the author also be sub things? You can have multiple messages in a single piece of.
Well, yeah, because take me for example. I wrote a FiMfiction, and I've written several books and movie scripts that I never did anything with in the past, but they've always had multi-level symbolism. Now, so people have a point of reference here. The FiMfiction that I wrote was kind of like the very bottom, most buried in there is the whole story was an analogy of what it's like to become a brony. And it is buried in there, and it's just something I kind of even had in the back of my head while I was writing the main story, but it's also about, what happens through, what can happen to somebody if they don't take good care of themselves, or if they're suffering from sleep deprivation. And it's also about kind of learning how to stand up for yourself, things of that nature. It was also a writing exercise for me because I tried to write a main character that was completely opposite to me as much as possible. So when you get that going, you might not, somebody who's reading it might not see all of those things. So if they don't see all of those things, is it really there? If the tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, did it make a sound? What do you think, DJ?
Could you repeat that? I got distracted for a second.
Oh my gosh, pay attention. We're live. So, yeah, I wrote this so that the audience can have something to reference. I am referencing the FiMfiction I wrote that had like 5 different layers of symbolism in with it. And on the surface, it's about finding yourself, and it was a writing exercise for me to try to write a character that was opposite to myself. And, so everything below that, is it really there? Like, can we really say that it's about all these different things if it's not blatantly obvious? What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I think it's still there. If the author purposely intended for it to be there, it's still there. It doesn't matter whether people see it or not, as long as it's actually there.
Exactly. That is my point. So someone comes along and says that the story, which is called Dream Equestria, isn't about any of that stuff. It's just about this nobody. What was the main character's job? He worked in customer service in a call center, and he got pulled into Equestria. He was just a normal dude, human, and he got pulled into Equestria. Yes, it's one of those freaking stories. It's there. Who am I to refute that person? What do you guys think?
I mean, I want to jump in here because, like, it's inevitable that someone is just going to interpret that as is. Like, no matter how good of a person you are, good of a writer are, you're not going to reach everyone with your message, whether because they just don't see it or they refuse to see it. And I just feel like death of the author, in a way, is an inevitability, like for those, either from those who just don't actually see it and just concentrating on what's there, or those who just reject the idea outright.
So what do you think of? So let's take it to the next step and say, do I refute people like that as the author myself, or do I embrace their interpretations? What do you guys think?
I think in a way it's good to maybe embrace interpretations, maybe see why he just saw that. Maybe you can embrace it and determine for yourself, like, does he actually have insight, or is he a guy who just doesn't get it and that's fine because not everyone is going to get everything, or is he just a guy looking for trouble and just came in to hate for the sake of hating?
Can you be a little more clear on what you mean by those kinds of things?
All right, so first example, what if he just genuinely just didn't see it, right? So you have to determine, like, does he actually not get it, or is he actually not getting it because he just is seeing what is there, right? Like, everything just flew over his head, or maybe he did see it, but he was just more focused on the story, right? Maybe that was one interpretation. Like the symbolism was there, but he was just focused on the guy in the Equestria thing, right? Because some people just want to read the stories just for the concepts alone, not really looking for symbolism, right? Especially if it's a fanfic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you have another instance, let's say, like, the guy is looking for something, but he still just didn't see it, maybe because it just flew over his head again. But in this case, though, he was trying to look for it. Maybe you can interpret that you did something wrong that caused it to flow over his head, or maybe he just needs to know the proper ideas in order to grasp them, right?
Right.
And then the final example is the guy who just came in there looking to maybe just see what it was and then just rejecting any kind of concept outright because, I don't know, maybe he's a jerk or something like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like it's a case-by-case thing. Like, Death of the Author can come with positive outcomes or even neutral outcomes, like with the first two examples, but then you have the negative outcomes where they're just ignoring outright and just doing some kind of malicious kind of interpretation there to stir up trouble. As it says, haters going to hate. I mean, you're not going to please everyone, whether it's on purpose or not.
So does anybody have anything to say to that before I get into it?
I had an answer to your original question there.
Yeah, give it to me.
How I see it is, I do agree with Scan that Death of the Author is sadly inevitable since people are always going to have their own interpretations. However, as the author, I feel you should still put out your intentions. So going back to the example of someone coming up to you saying that's saying their own interpretation, you could say, I understand that's the way you see it. This is what I actually intended. You can agree with it or not, but that was my intention. I'm not going to stop you from having your own understanding of it, but you should know that this was the original meaning.
Okay, that certainly helps. Scan, do you have any thoughts?
No, not at the moment.
Nah, yeah, you've been kind of quiet over there. Feel free to chime in whenever.
Yeah.
So, what do we do? What do we do when the purpose was to deliver, say, an important message of morality? So let's take, for example, one of the controversial episodes of Friendship is Magic, and usually the most controversial one to talk about for Death of the Author is Feeling Pinky Keen. So everybody's thinking that's a religious episode about having faith in something that's intangible, and it that manifests itself in a different way when the people who themselves made the episode said it's not. Now this is important because that's how people set a basis for the lens through which they view the whole world and how they interpret everything that happens to them. So if we can sit here and say that something and attribute meaning to anything, and anything can mean anything, then does a moral lesson mean anything at that point? I know I'm rambling here, but do you guys understand what I'm saying? That when something can mean anything, it ends up meaning nothing? That's what I'm getting at.
Well, I would say in the way, like, that's going to happen. That's also another thing that's going to happen. Like, you're just going to have those people who just come up with the most wireless interpretations. I mean, look at the fandom itself. We have correct shipping. We have all these crossovers that have gotten massively popular.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, you can say, like, at the Death of the Author, like, they never intended it to be that way, but the fandom just said, hey, why not? Let's go for it, for better or worse, of course.
Well, yeah, and then we get things like Slice of Life, but how does that relate to the question that I asked? So we're dealing with important issues of morality, that, how we treat each other or how we act in our daily lives and approach different situations are going to have very real world consequences on what becomes of us. If we're taking our inspiration for these things and our guidance from something that's inaccurate, or we're misinterpreting it wrong, then what good was it in the first place? So what I'm saying is, so I'll repeat, when something can mean anything, it means nothing. What do you guys think about that?
I'm trying to think of words here.
Same.
Oh, come on, guys! Don't let me win that easily.
That's a bit of a that's a bit of one to chew on there.
Yeah, well, I took it to its logical extreme, because that's ultimately, even though it is a logical extreme, it's something that actually does happen quite a bit. And then you get things like moral relativism, which, in my own experience, I've seen to be quite dangerous. So when we get things like this that are supposed to teach a lesson, and everybody's flying off the handle with their own interpretations, then we all end up fighting with each other rather than figuring out whether this thing actually works or not.
Well, I think I can answer a question with a question.
Okay.
So it's like, as you say, you're asking if everyone is going to interpret this all one way. Sorry, can you say your exact words again? I can't remember.
I'm going to assume that this is the part you're referring to. When a message can be interpreted to mean anything, it then means nothing.
Okay, yeah. So I'm asking this: if we were embrace that idea, would we even trying to teach these messages? Because the point of trying to get these messages across is to teach others around us and even the next generation. And it is, again, another inevitable. It just comes back to the inevitability that the interpretations are going to be wrong or people are going to miss it. It does come back to execution, yes, but it's just part of life that these things happen. But it doesn't mean we give up. We just keep going forward and keep trying to get it right, even if that perfection is impossible.
All right, that's an interesting point. Does anybody else have anything to say to that?
I think ultimately it falls on the individual. The interpretations could be vast, but as long as the author has put out what their intention was, I don't think there arises any real issue from it. Because, like he said, ultimately people are going to take what they want, but I think as long as the original intent is out there, everything will turn out okay.
All right. That's an interesting way to look at it. Scan, do you have any thoughts?
I think it mainly applies to the medium. If it's a regular story and you've got a message in it and everything that you'd like people to get, but that's not the main reason you made it. You made the story to make the story. Then it really doesn't matter if people are misinterpreting. Meanwhile, you went to the Bible for it. The Bible is actually trying to tell a specific message. So in that case, it would be if the author's intent was not achieved. That's a much more bigger problem than just a story that has a message embedded in it.
So are you saying that unless the author intended there to be a message, it doesn't really matter?
Unless the author's intention for making the medium was to actually teach a message as the top priority. So this would be less in your fantasy section and more in philosophy and other things. Books that when you read them, you're expecting to learn from the author what they're trying to tell you. It's not you pick up a Star Wars book and, oh no, I didn't get that. He's trying to say that blue should be green or some weird message or something.
I think it would be more along the lines of you see a character take an action or make a decision that for whatever reason you know firsthand wouldn't work in real life, but then it works out really well in the book. How would that kind of thing make you guys feel?
It depends on the medium. Is it our world or not? Different worlds will establish different rules for what can happen.
Well, that's more in the physical sense, because I don't think it's possible for humans to write something that doesn't relate on a human level, because then you end up getting things like H.P. Lovecraft's mythos, where he's dealing with things that are supposedly beyond human comprehension and don't care about us and don't act like us, and so you end up with things like that. So let's go back to the very Star Trek and the very little that I do know about it. You've got things like Vulcans and Romulans and Klingons. So you've got your logical, your emotion based, and your warrior clan. Now these are all just aspects of humanity that have been singled out and applied to the whole race in a trope commonly referred to as Planet of the Hats. So when you're dealing with a story of any kind, humans are really only capable of writing about humans. So to put this into an example, what was the episode? In season 8, I believe it was Matter of Principles, where Starlight is running the school for a day, and Discord comes and wreaks havoc. And she kicks him off the campus, and then later apologizes. She kicks him off the campus because he was acting like a total jerk, and later apologizes for herself not reaching out to him. And I slammed on the nearest wall, and I said, "No, that's not how it works." Because when you're running in a leadership position like that, to a certain degree, I don't think it matters if how you reach out to somebody. If they're disrupting your class and threatening the safety of your students, and you've asked them nicely to stop, which she did, and they keep doing it, and they prove themselves to be a danger like Discord was doing, then when you're acting like that, you don't get to have quarter, and you don't deserve that level of empathy. So that type of thing doesn't work. Nobody learns anything like that. I know that firsthand from watching it several times in real life. That just reinforces the behavior when you apologize for punishing somebody when they did something to deserve it. So that's so when we're dealing with something that's more esoteric, when you run into something that definitely doesn't work in real life, how are you supposed to examine it? That was what the question was. So what do you think about all that, Scan?
I think people get too hung up on it.
Okay.
That it really doesn't matter if the message behind Tom Sawyer is missed by people because it works in multiple mediums. But if somebody puts out a thing that's like the in-depth look at how X affects the world, and people come out with a different interpretation, that is a big problem.
How so?
Actually, sorry.
I was just gonna say how so, but hold on to that thought, Dev, unless Scan doesn't have anything.
What?
Never mind. What were you saying, Dev?
I actually wanted to chime in there with you, going with matter of principles there, because I just feel like right there would be a death of the author interpretation there, right? Because hypothetically, let's say, what if the author's interpretation, what was that this episode is supposed to be about reaching out to others, or I can't remember that morally.
Well, that's pretty much what it was. It was about trying to be more empathetic as to why people were acting a certain way. But I took major issue, which I can understand to a degree, but I took major issue with Starlight's execution in apologizing for doing what was necessary. Go ahead, Dev.
Yeah, and exactly. And so wouldn't that you be taking issue with it be a death of the author situation, because you came out with an interpretation that stands in contrast to perhaps what the author may have been intending?
Well, no, because I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm taking what was explicitly said in the episode, which is very hard to have death of the author when at the end of every episode they write a friendship letter saying exactly what they learned and exactly what we were supposed to take away from the episode here. I said no, that doesn't. So I'm taking what was the original intention of the author, and then I'm comparing it to real life. I'm not saying, well, Starlight said this, therefore she must have meant something else entirely. So what do you think about that, Dev?
So if I'm following you right, you're not really taking issue with the episode itself, but rather the application to real life.
Yeah, which is I don't believe I'm misinterpreting the author's intentions through an example like a matter of principles, because they explicitly stated what it was. But when I was addressing Scan, it was a matter of yes, I'm not misinterpreting things. It's just that what was said was not applicable in real life, so I'm criticizing the message on its own merits. Scan was talking about at least I'm fairly confident he was talking about something that's more of a physical sense, like physics work differently, like say the Star Wars, where you're able to have something like the Force or lightsabers or things like that, even though physics don't work like that. And I was bringing it to a more humane level.
I understand that, yeah, but I'm not saying you misinterpreted it. It's just that the execution of the author's execution caused you to come out with a different interpretation, probably one that stands in contrast to what they were going for, since for all intents and purposes, Friendship and Magic is a moral-driven show, and wouldn't that your objection to that moral in real life be an example of death of the author because they intended to teach a lesson for life, but you are saying no, that lesson, the execution here, it stands in contrast to life?
I want to say no, but I have no hard evidence to refute it, other than what I had said previously. So I suppose we're at an impasse there. DJ, you've been quiet for a little bit. Do you have anything to say on this?
Well, to answer, it just sounded more like you accepted what it was, you just didn't agree with it. That doesn't sound like death of the author.
That's what I was saying.
That just sounds like, okay, so that's what it is.
I just said it way more long-winded. Yeah, I just said it way more long-winded because I don't know how to condense my sentences when I'm talking in free form. I've got one more question here before we move on to audience interaction. So if you guys listening, all 15 of you, have anything you'd like to ask, get those questions ready and send them into the chat there, and I've been writing them all down. When it comes to death of the author, does it matter who the author is and how they identify? Does that affect whether or not their interpretation and viewpoint as portrayed through their art is valid? So basically, what percentage does identity politics come into play here when it comes to interpreting an artist's work? What do you think, Scan?
I think it shouldn't matter at all.
No? Why is that?
Their artwork is their own thing. Like we've been saying, you can interpret things and stuff. You see things that are nice and stuff. Oh, what was it? There's a Magic the Gathering artist, and she's a large part of the player base has attacked her or whatever because they're calling her, all the names and stuff, racist, homophobic, and everything, because she had a problem with trans women. If a lesbian doesn't want to be with one, there is a problem or something. Well, she's a married lesbian, so it's kind of stupid calling her homophobic and everything. But a lot of people are trying to say boycott her art and trying to get Wizards to never hire her ever again to draw another card.
Okay, so you're saying that somebody's identity and what they are as a person rather than who they are does not change the outcome of whatever messages they're trying to put through their art. Is that a good way to surmise what you're saying?
Yeah.
All right, DJ, what do you think about it?
I think it will always be an influence, but I think you also have to take the art and the person as two separate things and try and compare to see whether who that person is actually affecting the art.
Okay, how so?
So I suppose, how to word this? I suppose words are escaping me. I go to Dev for a second so I can think.
All right, not a problem. Dev, what do you think?
So I've been pretty pro Death of the Author so far, but I want to come on and say that it actually does just come down to the type of art being presented, because there is a difference between entertainment and actual education, right? So I don't really think Death of the Author is a thing that should be used if someone's just putting out something completely for fun and people are like saying, oh, this is an allegory for X and da 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 da, when really it's just supposed to be a fun thing at the end of the day, right? Likewise, I think sometimes, even with Friends of Magic, even though I take it kind of seriously, too seriously at times, I will admit that, it is at the end of the day a show of magical colored horses, right? But also, too, it's trying to be a educational show, and I think we should hold it to a bit of a standard there, especially when it's supposed to be for young kids, right? And I feel like Death of the Author, in a way, there would apply more, because intention when it comes to something like education is really important, right? But then also, too, on the flip side, I would say that sometimes standards from entertainment should be held up there, and I think Death of the Author can just arise from, oh, I thought this was bad because of this interpretation of what you think the characters are like, or something like that. And I'm not trying to get into like, oh, you don't know the characters, but like how the characters are being portrayed versus our real life. In the end, I just think Death of the Author is just a what is like an inevitability once again, but it can be used bad or good. It depends on the medium. I just feel like interpretations are something that we're all going to have, and like we should listen, and case by case, are they valid or not? It's up to us.
I don't think identity matters all that much, because I prefer to take the message at its face value and compare it to how the real world works. Like I've seen a number of people say, for example, that that a man should never be allowed to write a female character, which I think is very extreme, but also very inaccurate. We've had many, many very good episodes of Friendship is Magic written by Mitch Larson, who's handling an entirely female cast and doing a very good job of it and keeping them, very true to life and their character archetypes. But I will say that there are a lot of bad writers out there who don't know how to empathize with somebody that's different from them, and therefore does a poor job of interpreting their perspective. So you get problems like that, but I have never in my life seen any kind of correlation or causation to somebody's identity. I don't even believe in the concept of race outside of human race, so just throw that one out. But, gender or political identity or anything like that, religious affiliation, sexual orientation, it never matters what somebody is in terms of the perspective that they're writing from. It only matters how well they understand that other perspective and can they convey it. So that's my take on identity politics going into the analysis of a message or not. A lot of people out there will just discount something if it's supposedly written by the wrong type of person, which I think is very dangerous and not conducive to healthy conversation or society in general, as a matter of fact. So, and with that, 3.5 minutes behind schedule, which is not a huge deal. I'm not too worried about it. Let's move on to the audience interaction portion. So if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns on anything we've said thus far, please feel free to leave them in the chat there and we'll get to it. Meanwhile, we have had a few questions in the chat as this has been going on, and I've been keeping up with them to the best of my ability. Battleship Agincourt says, if you have a terrible ending to a great story, such as Game of Thrones, I can imagine a new and better endings written by other writers. So then he says, who gets credit for an ending that he didn't write? And I'm assuming the he is George Martin in this case. So what do you guys think about that? Who's to blame for the ending of the King of Thrones show? Scan, because you're laughing.
The people who wrote it are to blame for the ending of that show.
Yeah, You don't think George signed off on any of that? Or
Well, if I remember right, he stopped working with the show seasons ago.
Yeah, he stopped working with them around season 5. After season 5, it's all the showrunners.
Well,
he's no longer part of it.
He did a better job than Lauren Faust. What do you think, DJ?
Yeah.
Well, like I had heard, he had stopped involvement. There was, I believe, he gave plot points, but ultimately everything around those plot points were thought up by the show writers, so it's all on them.
All right, Dev.
Well, it was entirely on D&D. I don't know their names. I just know that. But I just want to do one little tangent. Like, when it comes to different interpretations of a previous established work, there are a lot of factors that can come into it. Like, you have, like, let's say compared to Friendship is Magic and its fanworks, right?
Yeah.
The fanworks have no limits on like where they can go because they're not upheld by media or media standards, right? So there is that to consider. And then when you have like a TV series versus a book series, you have that. And then in this case of Game of Thrones, where you have the writers just going ahead without George's help, you have what happens there, which was terrible.
Okay. Yep. I mean, I know very little about Game of Thrones. I watch the first 2 seasons with what would have been my in-laws, but that didn't. But thankfully, none of that panned out. And yeah, could you imagine the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones? Now, for those who don't know, the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones are particularly raunchy. So watching them with your in-laws is just a whole new level of awkward. But that's all I'm going to say about that.
Porno with them.
Yeah. Teo Vela says Kenshin is a good example of death of the author. And Teo, I'm going to say, I'm going to make an assumption here. So he says Kenshin is a good example of death of the author. So Teo, if you're still listening, how so? I'm interested in that.
I know what he's talking about.
Oh yeah, take it away, Scan.
The creator of Kenshin is a confirmed pedophile.
Oh, that's bad.
But Kenshin is one of the most best done animes ever put out there.
I disagree. I most certainly did not like it.
Oh, I loved it. But anyways, you got this anime that, besides you, a bunch of people think is super great, but the creator behind it is a confirmed pedophile. So what do you do?
Yeah, do we enjoy something despite who the author is? I think that goes into what I was talking about just a minute ago with identity. Yeah. Can we separate the artist from the author? And I think about that kind of thing all the time.
Actually, I want to jump in really quick.
Yeah, do it.
I think there was a controversy with the Powerpuff Girls reboot when I don't know if they were an artist or storyboard or whatever.
Oh no, it's the same exact problem. I actually remember hearing about that. Was it not the same exact problem?
Sort of, yeah. But like in the Powerpuff Girls reboot, you have the girls actually doing twerking and stuff. It's not actually just the story itself. So like the implications there just get a lot worse. For something that was bad suddenly becomes a lot worse once you actually know the author. I'm not talking about the...
Yeah, it's less oh god the implications and more so oh god the confirmations.
Yeah,
exactly.
When they actually enter it into their artwork too, because Kenshin doesn't have any pedophilic tones in the anime. But if he had like, you know, the main character being with a 11-year-old girl or something, then yeah, I think it would be a real problem.
So like you have the Kenshin where none of that is there, but you have the Powerpuff Girls thing where that stuff was there, and all of a sudden it's made a lot worse once you know some of the behind the scenes there, and you actually can determine some of the author's intentions or whatever that person was, what their position was.
Yep. All right, let's move on then. The next question we got here. Well, first I should shout out to Trent Jerome if he's still watching. He just says, new subscriber, by the way, Brony. Thank you very much. Welcome. And then he asks, is the 1971 Willy Wonka a good example? And then he cites differences between the book and the movie, such as using golden eggs instead of nuts, and using the title of Wonka rather than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I think those are minor adaptation changes. Now that's not necessarily death of the author so much as it is adaptation, which is another can of worms that we actually didn't get into. Shoot, which could probably be a whole nother stream in itself. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think adaptation and author interpretation is a completely different subject.
Yeah, most of those little changes, they don't change the story. They don't even really change the message, do they? Whether eggs or nuts isn't going to affect what Charlie's telling us what it is.
Unless the nuts or the eggs were supposed to be similar to something. I vaguely remember in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, when they lost that spoiled girl down the chute there, and somebody said, "Oh, she must have been a bad egg." That analogy probably would not have worked if they were nuts.
Well, I think she was a bad nut. That's what they said.
Yeah, she's a bad nut in the movie. They might have said she's a bad egg in the book.
Well, no, it was eggs. It was eggs in the movie.
Okay.
No.
There's nuts in the movie.
Are we talking about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Or are we talking about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory?
No, guys, you guys are talking about both. There was a Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory movie that had the geese, but then there was a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory remake that had the nuts.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've heard that the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie, in some aspects, was more they balance themselves out in what they change from the source material. And I know that I've read the book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but I don't remember a gosh darn thing about it. So I'm not going to weigh in on that one myself. What are you saying, Dev?
The biggest adaptation difference, as I can recall, is the nuts instead of the geese, and then in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie did end up focusing more on Wonka and his father in a bit. That's the major differences I remember.
Okay. Doughboy123X says, can the author be too specific and over-explain their points, leaving no room for discussion or interpretation? We got a word for that.
Yeah,
and I think it's we got a word for that, and I think it's called pontificating.
It's hitting you over the head with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that lessens interpretation. It actually just creates more, because people will just think, "Oh, this author's just being pretentious. This is pretentious story."
Or like preachy. That. Yeah, I think you can go the other way though.
People ditch the story.
I think you can go the other way too, though, with Death of the Author being used too liberally, where people just make nonsense and then go, it's open to interpretation. Yeah, get out of here, you freaking hippie. Tell me a story.
Oh, so you mean high school English classes?
Yes! Sorry, I blew out everybody's ears there, but yeah. DJ said that night, and I had flashbacks.
Oh yeah, you could definitely take Death of the Author the wrong way. That's one of them. That's one of the extremes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, I remember being in high school
where there is none.
I remember being in high school, and my English teacher went on and on about how it was. I think the story was called something like The Girl in Yellow or something like that, and we were studying this. It was a short story about this lady who, for her own mental health, was locked up in a room, and it was yellow, and the yellow caused her to go insane, and she started seeing people trying to break out of the wallpaper or something like that. I'm butchering it. I am butchering it, and I know it. But it was something right along those lines. And she just, and all she had to back this up was, think about standing in a yellow room for an extended period of time. Wouldn't that drive you insane? And I'm like, no. Maybe that's just me, but I don't know.
No.
Next thing here. Angel of Speed asks, what are our thoughts on Friendship is Magic being continued in the comics? We all know about that, right?
I'm aware.
Wait, what? What about it? I still buy the comics, though.
Yeah, Friendship is Magic is being continued in comic form. We're getting a season 10 in comic form.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
DJ, what do you think?
I need to catch up on my reading though.
Yeah, so do I. I left off in like the mid 70s for the comics.
Yeah, I still grab them every week. I have a stack of comics to catch up to.
Alrighty then, DJ, what do you think?
I think it's great because the finale, as great as it was, it still left a lot of room for more stories to be told. And there's even newer dynamics with... I don't know if we want to do spoilers, but...
Well, no,
yeah,
I'd rather not do spoilers, so let's just wait.
There's a big shake-up at the end with how things run, so it'd be nice to see stories continue and see what they get up to in between the last 2 episodes.
Alright, and Dev, what do you think?
I'm honestly mixed about that because on the one hand, yeah, the story continues, but on the other hand, I do know the comics have a mixed reception, and especially in terms of like what the show continuity versus the comic continuity. And now also, I do think a lot of fans don't even. It's not even that they just hate the comics and don't take it into the canon; they just aren't aware of the comic canon. So it's like I feel like a lot of people would just not bother with the comics because they never got into them, you know. And then those who already don't like the comics, they might think that the writing will be on a similar level to one they don't like already, you know?
It is for that reason that I'm going to end up reading all of those comics. Also, I cannot get enough Friendship is Magic in my life. It feeds me.
Well, as far as I know, this comic line isn't like a continuation of the current one. It's just a comic interpretation of what the next season would be.
Okay, that's interesting.
So it would be show continuity more than comic, since it's not a continuation of any of the comic lines.
All right. So I'm going to call it there because we're just a little bit over an hour. But I had fun. I think it was a very interesting conversation. I learned a little bit. What do you guys think? Any closing thoughts? Real quick scan.
Thoughts? Just... yeah, I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's just an interpretation thing.
All right, DJ.
I feel sad the death of the author will always be a thing, but for those authors out there, make sure your words get out there as well. There will always be other interpretations, but make sure yours is among them.
Always study your craft. I agree. Dev, what do you think?
I'm still for it. I feel like I'm not sure where I've heard this before, but I feel like this is definitely not my interpretation. But I feel like Death of the Author is an equalizer of sorts between like the author and the readers. But like it can be used in the wrong way, yeah. And like definitely like when it comes to educational stuff, there's something to keep in mind about that. But I just feel like it is something that's good in a way. I just feel it's a thing that sparks more thought and growth.
All right, and I would say always keep an open mind. Always ask and try to learn more about the author and what they had intended while you're interpreting their work, and compare it to more or less to how you view the world itself, while again keeping an open mind and trying to learn more about how other people view things for yourself. There's a lot of good that can come from that. Thank you all so much for joining. We peaked at about 20 viewers. We're sitting at 11 now, so thank you to the 11 that stuck it out. Angel of Speed says, thanks for reading my question. You're very welcome. Hopefully we'll see you guys at the next one. I do live streams every week. Every other week is Brony Debates, and every other week is Friday Night Fights, where we play video games. If you want to make suggestions for Brony Debates topics, I highly recommend it. Just hit me up on Twitter or email. My contact is in the description, and leave your suggestions. If you want to be on these streams, I'd love to have you. I just need you to join up on the Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And thank you to all of my generous Patreon supporters, especially the people at the $10 and up tier. These guys are Autoknight, Sodden, Girder, Senko, Jennan, Kellogg, Kyle Christensen, my friend DJSkywalker right here, Mike's Geek World, and the Equestrian City Heroverse series. Check out all those links in the description. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining. I will see you next time. Everybody say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Good night, everybody.
Jumosayo.